All right. So welcome to the Ohio Peace and Conflict Studies Network and the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflicts webinar series on integrating conflict resolution and peace building into your college and university programs, certificates, degrees, and centers. Today we have community mediation centers expanding opportunities for colleges and universities, and we're excited to have join us DG Mon, who's with the National Association for Community Mediation, and Kimberly Jackson Davidson from the YB Center for Dialogue at Oberlin College. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them. This webinar will be recorded and it will be archived on the Ohio Peace and Conflict Studies Network's webpage. So hopefully for those who may not have been able to join us live, you'll have the ability to access it off of YouTube via the OPCSN webpage. Thank you so much, and thank you, Kim and DG, for being with us. Take it away.
There we are. All right, very good. Well, welcome and thank you for listening in. We're going to talk about communication centers in 2020, expanding opportunities for colleges and communities, and how colleges and universities and other institutions of higher education can become a nesting place, the inspiration place to begin to nurture the development of conflict resolution skills, and particularly communication skills, communication centers. I will be asking questions of Kimberly Jackson Davidson. She is the director of the YBCD and the ombudsperson for Oberlin College. I am DG Mon, the president of the National Association for Mediation, and we serve and are comprised of hundreds of communication centers and hundreds of individual communities around the United States and Canada, all providing opportunities for people to be brave in their truth and be able to walk through their conflicts in a way that is helpful for all involved. Mediation is a process that creates opportunities for individuals and groups to come together to create choices that by both process and outcome empowers them to be brave and transparent and address their conflict as they are best able to do so. Community mediation does not provide the resolution. The participants provide the resolution. It provides the process, and the process varies from community to community, issue to issue, from big M mediation to restorative justice circles and practices, to coaching, to facilitated dialogues, to world cafes, to all variety of mechanisms used across the globe to help people come together, be in shared space, and walk through the barriers that are presented between them in a way that both individuals or parties or communities leave respected and with dignity. And today we're going to talk a bit about how this all began and is evolving at Oberlin College. And so the first question that we have is, how can an institution of higher learning embrace the opportunity to serve as an incubator for nourishing communities?
Oh, well, I think that there probably are a number of ways to do it. We have chosen here to do it by partnership, as opposed to creating something on campus that is sort of tossing out a service to the community. But I'm sure that there are ways to build programs on campuses that are serving the community with community members being a participant. I don't know if you have other thoughts about that from models that you've seen, DG.
I think, again, it's community by community and institution by institution. Many times the incubator process may come out of the ombuds office, or it may come out of, if they have an associate's degree or certificate in peace studies, if they have a full degree in conflict resolution education, many institutions will create a center so that students have the ability to practice some of what they're learning. see it in play, and through that nature, take it from a community-only dispute resolution center, as in the community of the students, to out to the broader community in which the institution sits. And many times, as we know, there are gown and town issues that surface, and the centers can really provide that space for those conversations to happen and to address them when that relation gets a bit tense.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess then the next question is, what is the YBCD at Oberlin College? First question, and the follow-up, how does it connect to the idea of community mediation in the city of Oberlin? So the first question is, can you tell us a little bit about YBCD?
Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is say that it's named for the first ombudsperson that Oberlin appointed, Yorkwa Belichu, and it was named in her honor after her retirement in 2015. So I feel like it's important to say the name out loud. It is a complicated name to say, but I feel like she started a legacy at the college that it's been my hope as ombudsperson to follow in. And the question about, well, I guess I should say the center has a mission or focus to assure that in mediation and dialogue and some of the informal modes that you mentioned when you were talking about what mediation centers can offer, that those things are available in a way that assures that all voices are being heard. So at the core of what we do at the center really is a sense of social justice, both through helping people who train as mediators to begin to understand their personal biases and not to hide from them, but to engage in a way that we call multi-partial, so that they're aware that they may need to adjust their questioning, their listening skills to assure that they aren't sort of shutting down one part of the conversation. So we've taken in our training for mediation and facilitation a stance of helping people to acknowledge that we all carry implicit bias, and to not hold so strongly to the idea that being neutral or impartial means that you can shut down those things in yourself, but that you can learn to ask better open-ended questions that keep valuing all of the voices that are involved in the conversation. So I hope that is helpful, but it's sort of core to anything that comes out of the center. The second question, how does this connect to the idea of community mediation? Yorkwa Belichu, from the beginning, allowed some number of residents of Oberlin who were not officially tied to the college to be able to participate in training. And I think that what I've done as I've come into the office has been to continue that practice. And really the starting point for what is evolving as the Oberlin mediation program is that one of the people who trained, who is a resident of Oberlin, realized that there were quite a number of people in the community of Oberlin who didn't work for the college and who weren't students, who had this training over the years. And he asked if I would help him to call together some of those people to explore what it would mean for the city to have its own program. So in essence, I wouldn't have particularly come up with the idea of doing something distinct from the college, but when he invited me, I was a willing partner.
Excellent. Yeah, many times moving, if not physically off the campus, at least changing who's hosting it can have a great impact, especially if the community has a fraught relationship with the college, so it isn't one identified as, well, of course, the people are going to side with the college if that's a dispute. A second good reason is even if the relationship's great with the college, people may not tap it because they may think, oh, that's only for people who work at the college or students. It doesn't serve me. So even if the relationship is really wonderful between the community and the college, having it move out is another good way to say we're actually bridging both. So it sounds like it was a great opportunity then for you, which so you got this invitation. I do want to back up to one thing, that we do really focus on the community part of mediation because we believe that the centers should offer those services that make the community most comfortable to be brave. And sometimes it isn't always big M mediation, the idea of having parties and caucuses and all those trappings of a big M mediation actually can be off-putting for some folks. So a lot of our centers will offer a variety of other conflict resolution skills that may be more connected to the community. And just for folks who are wondering why we keep calling community mediation that's listening in, that's why it's important to us that that's what precedes it. And so with this question, what were the seeds then? The city contacted you and said, hey, let's see if we can dance together and do something for both the college and the community. What were some other seeds of the initiative that then or now that's taking root as the Oberlin Communication Project continues to evolve to its potential?
Right. Well, I continue to go back to a training that 7 people from Oberlin participated in between the fall of 2017 and the fall of 2018, called Ohio Civic Engagement Training. We together in 3 two-day sessions spaced over the year learned from local trainers and people from Essential Partners in Massachusetts about how to use reflective structured dialogue as a way of helping communities engage in talking about topics that tend to be divisive. And I actually think that the design of that training program, which had people come as a team and required that we identify projects that we would work on during the training so that we weren't just getting input, but we're actually learning to practically engage. I feel like the relationships that we created in doing the work for that project in many ways has been a significant seed in this idea coming out. And I think in a lot of ways, we're very different people, very different personalities. And in the small M mediation sense, I feel like the work that we did together was a form of mediation, coming together across race and class. And so at the heart of this actually grows the trust building that we've continued to do as 7 people engaging in offering dialogues in the community. The project has now shifted because the ballot initiative that one set of us were working on actually was passed, and we decided that in order to sort of restore the same kinds of feelings of not being informed, that we would continue to work with the school district when they invited us to facilitate coffee chats, so that the lines of communication are hopefully increasing, improving, and getting people ready for 3 years down the road when a decision needs to be made about phase 2 of this building project. So I feel like that initial 7 people, we've continued to work and are trying to reach out. We've done, I think at this point, probably 5 dialogues.
Great.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little more about those dialogues? It's fascinating, the process you use to learn how to work well together. You stressed trust, that you really grew to trust each other. And that's so important when the project is evolving, because all of a sudden it may evolve in a slightly different way than one of the people may have thought it would. And if you trust each other, you're still able to go with the flow. Can you tell us a little bit about any of those 5 dialogues that you just referenced?
Sure. The first one very much didn't go the way that we had planned. There was a very elaborate process of inviting people to try to make sure that they would show up in the room. And I think that we ended up, because of the numbers, choosing to do a smaller situation where we sort of did mapping with that group. We asked some of the questions that we had planned, but we spent time engaging them and trying to understand how we might reach the community better. And then we planned a follow-up dialogue that was more successful. Those people were able to help us reach out to other people. I think what was in those first 3 dialogues really key was the principle of storytelling, which was a central part of the Essential Partners RSD model, is that we found that even though we could always have done better in attracting a diverse group, that we had a fair amount of diversity, and that having people hear each other's stories and why schools were important to them and the various ways that we would, pitch the questions in each meeting was really helpful in allowing people to generate ideas. And I think having people walk away feeling some sense of hope. We did have a good enough connection with the school board that we were able to keep presenting the results that we were getting out of those meetings at school board meetings. So I would say, even though this is not about the core of what was happening in the room where dialogue was going on, I think it was another part of the dialogue that we actually started to make an impression on the school board about the kind of communication that they needed to be getting out to the community. So whether people registered that we were a part of that, we were able to see over time a movement in the school system taking seriously the message that people were not being informed in the way that they wanted to be.
Excellent. And you dropped 2 C's that are so important if you're going to be an incubator for this type of work. You mentioned trust very strongly is needed. And then you also talked about hope and how important having that hope with each other. With trust and hope, then others are able to hear things that may be uncomfortable for them to hear, but they need to hear, as you pointed out, with changing the way they were communicating. And so one of the things I did want to touch on in this process is you touched on it earlier, to revisit a little bit, you made a very conscious decision in the discernment process that YBCD was not going to host Communication Center. Can you tell us a bit of, in that nurturing as it was evolving, how that became clear to you that hosting it at YBCD would not serve the community or the center's best interest?
Well, maybe the first thing that I would say is a tiny bit embarrassing. I think
you're among friends.
Yeah. I think when I came into the office, I had an interest myself in reaching out to the community, and the center had done some mediation in student-landlord conflicts in the past, and had been engaged in some conversations when there was actually tension between the police department and the younger people in the community, and college students were sort of advocating on behalf of younger people in the community. So Oberlin, the YBCD Center, was involved in helping those conversations happen. And so my picture was that I would reach out and, reinitiate relationships, and that the center could serve that role. And at the time, there was somebody in the community who was having that same idea. And I think that for me, it would have been easy. I had to keep resisting the idea, this is not a competition, that because of the principles of the office and the model, that YB had given, collaboration was really critical. And so that person actually was a part of the group of 7 who participated in the dialogue training that I was mentioning before. And so I think a piece of it was really working out that relationship and continuing to commit myself to open my hands and engage in a way that was collaborative and not competitive. So that's a personal piece of it. I also think over time I saw that regardless of why this other individual and I were thinking about the ways that we could serve the community, that the greater level of trust given where Oberlin was at that particular time in relationship to the college, that something coming into the community that was labeled by the college might really have been suspected. And I think if we really want people to be working on problems before they grow too big, they need to have places that they can go that feel trusted. So it's a long answer to your question, but I think that the sort of focus has to be on the people who are being served and not the program at the center.
No, and I think your answer lays out, as you know, for communication centers, there are 9 national hallmarks, well, international hallmarks that they are requested to follow. And you've talked about them. Hallmark 8 is about social justice, and sometimes social justice means the college looking at itself. And so not being embedded in the college frees you up from perhaps the appearance of an influence, not to call things what they are. Also, it sounds like in your community, especially with the students working with the youth, that you were very focused on what we call Hallmark 2, which is making sure anyone that wants to help create the opportunity for peace, for conflict resolution, can do that. They don't have to be just the students at the college, they can be the youth in the community. And now you talked about if we really want to address issues before they make the press or before the police are called in, then we need to think seriously how best to make us a place that people will access. And we call that Hallmark 6 for communication centers, that our responsibility is to make sure we're there the moment 2 parties or more believe, whoa, we need to stop the brakes, we're having some issues. It's the best time for folks to really hear each other before they go so far down the path where ego and emotions may take over, and those 2 things can really clog our ability to listen. So I appreciate very much your answer, because it really outlined 3 of the major 9 hallmarks. So Kim, keep going, and then I'm going to ask you going with the next question, which is really talk with us. What has been some opportunities that you've discovered, perhaps expected or unexpected? And then the second question is, and what has been some challenges that you expected or didn't expect to have? So why don't we start with opportunities first? What would you say are some opportunities you've discovered in this path of evolution that have excited you, that have really said, yes, we're going in the right direction, this is what we need to do?
You know, it's interesting. I live in Oberlin, so, you know, the things that are going on here are important to me, not just because of my work, but because they've impacted me. And so I think that one of the opportunities that presented itself was, you know, after 20 years and 3 kids through the school system, to be able to open a space that could allow room for some of the things that people have perceived over a long period of time to be voiced. Yeah. That has been, it was unexpected. I probably wouldn't have done it had we not gone through the training together. And I would just say in a more, it may be a little bit repetitive, but I also think that the opportunities to build relationship through the work, that is how people bond. And I've been amazed at friendships that have evolved out of this that I think would never have happened.
Can you tell us about one of those? You said it opened space for voices to be heard. What was the voice that wasn't being heard that through this evolutionary process had an opportunity to be heard? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I'm going to take a moment to pause and collect my thoughts.
Okay.
Well, so I can recall from the second dialogue that we did, we actually invited as many school board members to come, who, so that they wouldn't be violating the sunshine law and having a meeting. But we were able to have the school board members sprinkled across 4 different groups. I think there may have been 3 of them present. So they were able to listen in on 4 different groups. And I think that sort of in 2 ways. One, there were people in the circle whose stories I think school board members hadn't heard. And so I think that any of us can get locked into a place where we've done our due diligence, we've gathered the data, and we're pretty sure we're right. I think groups that have to make decisions can very easily fall into that pattern. And so part of what I saw happen in those dialogue circles was not that the school board members abandoned their belief that that they had backing for the things that they were moving in the direction of, but they were able to actually hear what was concerning people in the community about it. So it wasn't a particular type of person. It was kind of across the spectrum. And I think that they then had the opportunity, not necessarily in the dialogue, but when they went back to the table as the school board, to rethink how they were communicating certain things, to rethink the questions that they were asking. And I think actually in some instances to kind of temper language or direction that they were going to move in. And again, I think that in a formal school board meeting, that's probably not going to happen because you're on camera and you have to be right. And there's not the space for thinking and reassessing in that context. So I think this allowed them to walk away with a better range of understanding.
And
that
from how
answer
you
your
described, I'm sorry?
Did that answer your question?
Yes, and from how you described it, you really talked about coming from that place of respect, knowing where they could really be brave and how to set that up, and where they couldn't be brave because the cameras are on, they have to look a certain way, so they must behave in a certain way. So you helped give them an opportunity where they could talk through some of these choices. You gave them an opportunity where they could be transparent because they weren't being recorded. You gave them an opportunity to be empowered, if you will, for everybody to be listened to. And when you do that and treat everyone with that level of mutuality and respect, that braveness is going to come out. And I just really like that in your story is that you didn't, and that's what's so important about community mediation. We don't do it where the judge says it has to happen. It should happen where the participants feel most comfortable. If you're in a court setting or in a non-court setting, where are folks most comfortable to be in their truth? So I really, really wanted to underscore that with your story. It was wonderful. So moving to the not so positive side, and I do want to encourage for anyone who's listening in, if you have other questions, please jump in. We just don't have to do the ones I have for Kim.
Thanks. Let's pause. Thanks, DG. This is Jen Batten with the Ohio Peace and Conflict Studies Network and GPPAC. So let's see if maybe one of those who've joined us, JF Zimmer, Katerina, or Louise, have a question. Louise?
One is related to the reference that you made to hallmarks. You mentioned that there are 9 of them. This is a new term for me. I'm not familiar with it. Can you briefly describe?
Certainly, and thank you for the question. At NAFCM, we were created by community mediation centers from around the country. They first started the attempt in the 80s when communication was changing and really becoming more institutionalized and less anchored in the community. That didn't stick. They started again in the early 90s. And in that process, those who are practicing the work, no shade to our friend Kim and our university folks out there, but it wasn't just intellectuals doing the research. With that research, those who are practicing the skills came up with, here are 9 things. And they didn't start with 9 in their head. It was 3 days, I'm told, of a lot of tense consensus building. They came up with 9 things that every center should be about. The expectation is no center would be perfect on any of them, that it's always an evolution towards. So it's not a foundation, oh, we're perfect, we're doing this great. It's always, we're doing it well and we can keep doing it better as our community changes and the need changes. So they came up with 9, and they can be broken up very simply. The first 5 really deals with the organization itself. Is the center anchored in the community? Does the center believe that everyone can hold the space for keeping peace, for the opportunity for being brave? Are your hiring practices aligned with that? Are your volunteer practices aligned with that? How are decisions made in the center so it isn't people from one side of town making decisions for people on another side of town? How makes that happening? So there's 5 that really focus on the center. The second group being really focused on how you connect with those institutions that are also responsible for helping people resolve issues. So it could be the public housing agency, it could be the court system, the school system, churches, whomever in your community people look at to go to help them resolve issues. And those are hallmarks 6 and 7. And that's a bit of what Kim referred to. And then the last 2, hallmarks 8 and 9, which again, Kim referred to in our social justice, is really about, so what's your work in the community? The first 5, here's what you need to make sure your center is on the path it needs to be on. The second 2, that your relationships with people that directly are doing similar work, affinity partners, if you will, are well connected. How are you also connected in the broader community, as Kim has been describing with her center? And so 8 really looks at systems that marginalize folks, look at issues of social justice. As you know or may not know, mediation was formalized in the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Section 10, recognizing that certain folks couldn't get access to the judicial system. And so really empowered those communities to create their own processes for helping to deal with issues. And many cities, such as San Francisco and Philadelphia, actually gave them power for non-criminal offenses to actually develop solutions and then present it back to the city, and the city would adopt them. So that's where 8 and 9 really come from, is how are we making sure folks like yourself and others are aware of the centers in the community and how they can help you create the peace you're envisioning for yourself, for your family, for your friends, for your community. That's a quick run through. I appreciate the question, and more can obviously be found at nafcm.com, and we have our 9 hallmarks there.
Thank you very much. That's helpful.
Great.
And maybe at the end we could pull up, if we have some time, your webpage so we can see that a little bit.
That would be great. Thank you.
Sure.
So let's check before we move forward. Katerina or JF Zimmer, would either of you, do you have a question at this stage or a comment? You just need to make sure that you unmute your microphone. It's okay if you don't have a question, but we thought we'd check. And Louise Matthews is with Bluffton University here in Ohio's A Lion in the Lamb Peace Arts Center. And she conducted a webinar last week, which you'll be able to find archived a little bit later on the Ohio Peace and Conflict Studies Network's webpage. Thanks. So DG and Kim, take it away.
Okay, so Kim, we're back to the other half of the question. Thank you, Jen. When you talk about opportunities, this one is, what have been some challenges that you may not have been expecting that popped up along the way that may be helpful for those who are looking about how can we be incubators for this? What's some challenges that you've had to confront as a group and to work through as a group?
You know, I think I'm not trying to be Pollyanna about this, but I feel like the the challenges have also been our opportunities.
Okay.
It really has been the relationship building. I'm going to reference the conversation that you and I had recently. The sorts of things that I identified as challenges, I felt like you were pushing back and saying, well, that's the journey. Like you're doing it. So I will name those things with the understanding that, that they really aren't problems at all. I think some of maybe it would fall into the category of saying that it could become easy to look at doing something like this as creating an organization when the process that we're going through is doing the work. I think that is a message that I took away from our conversation. So, we've been engaging in thinking through how to address that value that you raised about making sure that the group of people building this from the beginning is diverse and representative of the community. And I think that that's a challenge. And so, we tend to fall into certain categories. We are racially mixed. We are mixed to some degree in class. We probably all have a little bit too much connection with the college, not necessarily as employees, but I think we are mindful of that. And as we've continued to move forward and now start to bring some other people in, it's clear that there are some differences in experience. So some people have mediation experience, but maybe more through the big M court mandated mediation, which looks very different from the way that we were trained. The majority of us who have been through training together. And so we are actually trying to identify a model of mediation that's available to us locally to do training in a way that is more cost effective than what I offer through the center on campus, so that we can have a kind of team building experience that will keep us from arguing about the different ways that we were trained, and to be able to focus on what's important for the community. I would say that that's one of the challenges that I perceive. Would you like to hear more?
If you have some, but I do want to underscore again, keeping that focus on the community needs to be the focus of the center. And the community is multi-layered with lots of different subsets in it. And so it's really helping to facilitate the emerging of those communities that don't feel heard, and really serve them, because those communities that do feel heard, they have access, as you described. And so it's really about reaching out to those that don't feel heard, that as came out of your story about the school board. But if you'd like to share a few more of those bumps along the way, that would be more than welcome.
I would say that really is the chief challenge, that all things swirl around. And I think that we, as you said, discovered it with the dialogues, that I think there are any number of reasons that people don't trust resources. So one of the things that we ran into with the dialogue was there was a person whose voice is really important in the community, and we very much wanted her to participate in the sessions, and she came. I twisted her arm about as hard as I could, and just before we broke up into the small group, she left and she said, I thought I could do it, but I just can't agree to these rules. I don't want somebody telling me when I can talk and when I can't talk. If somebody says something that upsets me, then I want to be able to respond if I feel like that's what's right. And I think that I don't know the answer to this, but there are certain frameworks in mediation and dialogue facilitation that don't work for everyone. And so finding models that will allow for people who don't feel comfortable, who feel like they've been silencing themselves already for a very long time, is probably also another important challenge.
And that underscores again the focus on community and why every center is different based on not only the skill set of the volunteers or the staff or the contractors of the center, but even more so based on what would help your community feel comfortable in these conversations, how they'd like them to be set up so that everyone can be heard, as long as we follow that the space is a space where people can be brave. So they do experience being respected. They do experience being honored for their truth, that they do experience that people are being real, that something isn't being put over on them, that they do experience, in a sense, that they can trust the room, that they're not going to walk away more harmed than before they entered. And figuring out that method should always be something that centers are constantly open to, because the populations change. And the methods need to change with them, so that you're constant, because it's about those who are in conflict. It's not about the holder of the space and what makes her or him feel comfortable. It really is about the people in conflict, and keeping your focus on them, as you've talked about with her, is critical. So the moment she says, this doesn't work for me, that's okay. Then later on, having a conversation with her and asking what does work for you, what would be the type of environment that would be most helpful for you when you're in conflict. Because it isn't about what's comfortable for Kim or DG or Jen. It really is about what's comfortable for the person in the conflict. And that's why sometimes we have to be able to say, I can't hold that space. That I realize that's what you need to feel brave. I can't hold that space. And that's why you want that variety of volunteers and staff in your center, because when someone can't, the hope is that someone else can, in that connected with the center. Are there other things you wanted to share on this question?
No, I think that's, I think that the challenges are, I don't find that they're specific nitpicky things. I think they're more related to values and living out values.
They're all, I would say the majority are always related to values. And if we can get people to recognize the shared value from at least my perspective, that's the starting place on having a real truthful conversation, and not about how you're living out that value, because until you get to talk about the shared value, then you're actually able to see each other as having something in common. And therefore, now I no longer want to hurt you or silence you because we have something in common. I want to actually be able to listen to you and help you. And when we get there, the change that happens in people is pretty amazing. So you underscored that again. You keep dropping these pearls, Kim, and I keep highlighting it so those who aren't here on the call, as well as those who are, can really seize that moment. And that takes us to our next question, which is really about the foundation. And let's go to the end of that question. In creating the foundation for this space you've talked about, to seek community-owned and reflected peace, what would you say is in place with that foundation right now, and what do you see still growing and evolving?
Well, I think that people are beginning to recognize us, probably through the dialogue is showing up, and now people have been asking questions like, could you come do this? Could you come do that? So I do think that there's a little visibility. I wouldn't say that it's name recognition, but it's here are some people who are consistently trying to help with dialogue. Not all of it has been through this group, but as we touch other things in the community, we tend to be bringing the same set of values. I think that what I really see as something that we are hoping for is the ability in this next phase to reach out to people who can engage and engage people who tend not to reach out for resources like this.
Yeah.
I feel like that is the growing edge for us.
So it sounds like, since we talk about the hallmarks, just we're looking at Hallmark 9, which is why it's there, is constantly going out. You think people know you, and you'll find a whole group that doesn't know you exist yet. And it's because they're not engaged, they're not bonded, and they're not connected to your communication models you're using. So it's constantly needing to go out, as you said, you mentioned both those points, increasing visibility and reaching those communities that are not yet engaged. So what have you on the foundational floor? Is it the visibility then?
So are you, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the question. You're asking me what things are in place.
Yes.
I would say what's in place is us finding the spaces to do things that we can. We establish a regular meeting time that we hold, we cancel when we don't need to talk about things, to actually move forward on logistical things like seeking a 501c3, establishing a steering committee. We have developed a few, like bookmarks and things that we can hand out. We are working to try to establish a core to this so that we could seek some funding to do that training together. And as I said, we have been plugging into initiatives that present themselves. So part of that has been continuing the work with the school system. There's one group that's sort of facilitating planning on that, and then the people who are working on the mediation project faithfully volunteer to serve as facilitators in those groups. So I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but that's what I thought.
I think it sounds wonderful, being open to what comes. And it's that having the fluidity to address that at the same time, the structure, you meet regularly, you make sure the process moving forward, you're looking at formalizing yourself, 501c3. That's always a balance between the two. And I do want, before I ask you this question, to know that one of the reasons that I became connected with NAFCM, becoming connected with Jen and her work, is the leadership of the NAFCM board to really say, we have a natural affinity with institutions of higher education, only because we need your research to keep exploring what's going well and not going well in the field. But we also see you as a great place to merge the mission, first to address town and gown, which is generally that tension, but also to serve the mission that most institutions of higher ed have, which is to the community that surrounds them, and establishing a center where people can have that space to create peace is so important, and such an important service to a community, and has been led through NAFCM, through a particular committee, strategic partnerships and resources, that has had 3 amazing chairs since I've had the pleasure of becoming the president of NAFCM. And the most current one is a strong believer in this natural connection. So I just wanted to make sure I give that background to why is NAFCM really expending energy, being blessed to work with Jen and what she offers us, and obviously with Kim, is that it's not just me driven. It is really driven by NAFCM seeing this as an area of needed growth for both institutions of higher education and for the field of mediation. And that's my background to ask this final question of you, Kim. How may NAFCM be a partner in your exploration of self-discovery regarding your ability to provide or incubate this possibility in your community?
Well, I would say that NAFCM has already been a really tremendous resource. I think that, in some conversations that we sought out deliberately. You were helpful in pointing us to the 9 hallmarks. And I think also instrumental in helping us think about what kinds of questions we could ask individuals and community stakeholders as we engage in needs assessment to get down to some of the kinds of things that you've been talking about in terms of what is actually needed in an entity that might be bringing a broad variety of conflict resolution options to the community. And I think actually in encouragement, I'll refer back to the recent conversation that we had, that it was very helpful to hear the admonition to not lose sight of the small things that are happening day by day as being a part of the work, and to not look for this moment of arrival as much as really committing to the process of what's going on. So.
Thank you, Kim. That's very kind. That Jen does really end our conversation. I realized that my .com was wrong. It's .org for NAFCM. So I don't know if there's any other additional questions that people may have, or with the 5 minutes we have, or do we want to bring this to a close a few minutes early?
Sure. Well, we can go ahead and just check. So Katerina, if I'm not mistaken, is with GPPAC, and Louise Matthews is with Bluffton University's Lion and Lamb Peace Arts Center. Do either of you have any additional questions before I hand it over to Kim and DG to hopefully bring up? Maybe you could bring up the NAFCM page and show where those 9 hallmarks are, DG, while we take questions. Luis or Katerina? You're muted right now. I can unmute you both just in case. Katerina or Louise have any questions?
Yes, even as you were finishing up here, I had gone to the website, and I look forward to reading through this more. It seems very helpful in terms of some of the resources and some of the programs. So thanks for sharing.
Fantastic. Thank you, and that's fantastic. We have the public page, which is open to everyone, and that's what I run the screen now. And then as members, we have the virtual library, which many folks find extraordinarily helpful. It's materials from not only research materials, but practical materials of what other people are doing. So you don't have to recreate documents. You can enhance them for what fits. There's a lot of support that we provide our family members to make sure they're strong, because we can't be in your community. The only way we can be is through you. And so as a member, we really focus on making sure we help you shine any way that you need. So I appreciate you looking at some of the items, but I do have it on the screen now, and I don't know if, did you want me to pull up the 9 hallmarks?
Yeah,
Jen?
Could you please do that as we
I can do that. So you'll see the first 5, as I mentioned, really focus on your organization. Is it, and you see that first one, is you want to make sure that the program has an advisory board that's, and key is, and that's what Kim brought up, represent the diversity of the community served. And that means if you're in a section of town, the majority of the boards are from that section of town. And that it shouldn't be folks from outside guiding an organization where they're not living and breathing and experiencing the streets in which that organization says it serves. And you'll see the second one, to make sure those volunteers, we strongly believe the practice of mediation is open to all persons, that you don't need to have any particular degree to be someone who can hold peace, as in, obviously you need training in the process you're holding, but you could learn that whether you have a GED or a PhD. And it really has to do with that person's intuitive ability to hold that space. And so obviously we need to be trained in what we're holding and how we're holding it, but it doesn't mean you need a prerequisite from it. And that's really important to our communication centers. You see accessibility, obviously low cost, that economics does not become a barrier. That's really what drove that. And the discrimination in the court system in the 60s really drove this to be put in the Civil Rights Act. And then you see the last one of being inclusive and making sure that your space doesn't inadvertently create microaggressions. And I know something we did when we were working with the older adults was people did an assessment of their space and realized in many cases they had no posters or pictures up of anyone that was older than 40, and that they would use endearment names for anyone that was older than 60. But it wasn't meant out of respect. It was meant out of, oh, aren't you sweet? Which actually hurts an older adult in their ability to feel they have something to bring to the center. So that really comes in Hallmark 5, and that's the first 5, as I'd mentioned, are really about the center. The second 2 is about how you connect. You heard Kim say we want to be at the earliest stage of conflict. And then obviously you also heard Kim talk about visibility, people aware we're here, so they'll use us. And that comes in the last, that's Hallmark 9, comes in 8 and 9, is about the community. I don't know with seeing it if you have any additional questions about them.
Any other questions before we close?
No other questions, but I just want to acknowledge that when I am part of hearing other people's and colleges and organizations work for peace, I am totally motivated and inspired, realizing that I'm not in this alone. Amen. And it goes much broader than just the ones that we hear about. So this is really helpful. Thank you.
And thank you. Actually, you underscored, I think, the reason why those folks in 94 created NAFCM is that when you're so busy doing the work, sometimes you feel burnt out and tired and the single voice screaming into the ocean and no one's hearing you. Yeah. And when they come together, just knowing, as you just said, and I really want to sweat, especially in what we're going through right now with this social isolation thing, knowing that there are other people holding the same values, doing similar work, can just help feed you in that moment when you just want to go, you know, I'm tired of screaming into the ocean. I'm done. And I do believe your point was the very genesis for why these directors came together and said, we need a national hub to make sure we have a place to be connected. I don't have to figure out who's doing it. I can contact them and they'll let me know. And that, so thank you. It's a beautiful reflection back. And I do think you're speaking very close to the truth of one of the reasons why NAFCM even got created. So thank you for that. Great. You made my day. Did. I think it's going to be the pleasure of being with Jen and Kim, and now I've expanded that pleasure, so thank you.
Thanks. And so DG, I don't know if in closing here, if you had mentioned how universities can become partners with NAFCM. Did you mention that yet?
No, I have not. It all depends on what your need is and what you do. We have some universities that are institutional partners, and they use it specifically with their classes that are working on community mediation or on peace, and they'll actually have their classes use the virtual library as part of their research tool. So we have those. It becomes a part of their very nature. We have others that are program members, and that is that they're incubating a center and they're working on it, and so they choose the program level. And it's very easy to become a member. You could go online, that page you were on. If you pull down the membership screen, it'll give you all the different categories you can fall into, and it's really picking the one that meets your institution of higher education's need at this moment, where you are in the spectrum of how NAFCM can best serve you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, DG and Kim. Any final closing words as we end here?
I just appreciate you hosting this, Jen, and Kim. I so appreciate you allowing the design to evolve the way it did and really focus on the amazing work you do in Oberlin. So thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you, DG, for for guiding me along with this and with the program.
Thanks so much.
Absolutely.
And in closing, for those who may be interested in sharing this session with others, or maybe you missed some of the past webinars, if you go to the Ohio Peace and Conflict Studies Network's webpage, you click on here over the right-hand side where it says resources and webinars, you'll be able to access the past webinars as well as the upcoming ones to register for additional events. So here are some of the past ones that we had, and I'll just share with you quickly where you'll be able to find today's webinar by clicking on the session today, which has the title, the summary, a little bit about each of our presenters, and then right here where it says session recording, where there's nothing listed, there'll be a direct link, and it will be archived on YouTube. So thank you so much, everyone, and thanks again to our guests and for those who joined us, and have a great day. Bye.
Bye-bye.